There's never a dull moment when it comes to Minnesota sports. Whether it's positive or negative,
the Yankees have swept the Twins.
Minnesota Sports Chat has you covered. Talking nothing but Minnesota sports all year long. It's time now for the soon-to-be award-winning, if only in his own mind, Minnesota Sports Chat with your host, Ross Brendel.
Well, that would be me. Welcome into the soon-to-be award-winning Minnesota Sports Chat. This is edition number 243, presented by my friends at Beans Coffee Company. You can tell I'm a little out of sorts. If you're watching on YouTube, I got elements in the wrong place. My buttons are in the wrong place. I can't quite tell where I'm supposed to sit. I've even forgotten the name of the fine young gentleman who's on the show today, because I haven't done one of these since, I don't know, somewhere around like the mid-20s of December. It was definitely last year, so it's been a while. But without further ado, our Minnesota Vikings are cooked. The Gopher men's basketball team is in the process of being cooked. And the Gopher football team has a lot of mayo for their next cooking preparations. All that and likely more today on the pod with Mr. Daniel House. He is from Gophers Guru and gophersguru.com with occasional work for MN Vikings Corner, as well versed as anybody in this town when it comes to the teams in this town, especially the aforementioned three that I just talked about. Daniel, I think we last talked for our big bowl extravaganza. Seems like forever ago.
Oh my gosh, it's been a while. Yeah, it's been crazy busy. I mean, between the transfer portal and the bowl games and the CFP and the NFL playoffs, and I was on a trip for the College Hall of Fame. Like, we haven't had a lot of time to link up.
Shout out to Greg Esslinger, named to the College Football Hall of Fame.
Yes.
The Greg Esslinger teams, the Mark Setterstrom teams, Barber, Maroney, Cupido, Cockrum, that was like the love for Gopher football for me, late 90s into the early 2000s, as I got to, I think, being of the age where not only were you like watching games, Daniel, but you were actively paying attention to things. And Greg Esslinger also had a bit of a career in the NFL, as did Mark Setterstrom. They were part of that offensive line that helped Maroney and Barber rush for all those yards. So good for
Big
him.
day.
Did you throw any money down? Did you bet on any ponies? Did you do anything when you were out in Vegas, Daniel?
I did not. I was there working. I was busy the whole time with the College Hall of Fame stuff. Very cool experience, though. It's an exciting day yesterday, like you said, with Greg, and then Blake Elliott at St. John's, wide receiver, going in the hall. Yeah. Jim Kleinsasser going in too. So our chapter is pretty involved in the process of nominating those people. I actually do that as another job to what I do. So it's pretty cool to see Greg get that opportunity, especially, the body of work speaks for itself.
Yeah, and Kleinsasser, a longtime Minnesota Viking. Blake Elliott, you mentioned St. John's, also spent technically an entire year with the Minnesota Vikings. He was injured during training camp and preseason. So many Minnesota ties this time around. Daniel, let's start with the Minnesota Vikings. I think we'll just both go with maybe unfiltered thoughts, and you can maybe reply to what I have to say or go in your own direction. We talk about this all the time, and I get it. I can be a cynic. I can be a bit negative. The disclaimer is that doesn't mean that I don't want every one of our teams to win, because I do. I want every single one to win championships, compete at a high level, whether that's the University of Minnesota, St. Thomas now. By the way, congrats to St. Thomas. They're technically more than likely now going to be tournament eligible next year because of a ruling by the courts. That's actually very cool. But there tends to be this notion of, you actually rather want the team to lose. Couldn't be further from the truth. Case in point, if that was true, I wouldn't waste a bunch of money at Gopher football games every year. Okay, so let me just get that aside. I'm really struggling with people who have vitriol and anger over this Minnesota Vikings team losing in the first round of the playoffs. I agree. I have always said expectations as a year goes on can change. They absolutely should have. It's fair and reasonable to expect that the Vikings could have won a playoff game or two. I also think if you take a step back, Daniel, it's also fair and reasonable to expect that they just might not have been all that good. Great. You can win games in the regular season. You can play really poorly at Jacksonville and win a game on the road. You can do that. But to expect that this team, after not securing the number 1 seed, to me, that is when the season ended. You could have sold to me the Vikings win 2 home games and appear in the Super Bowl to be the sacrificial lamb to somebody in the NFC. I said this on Before I Die. I said this to people that I know. I said this any which chance I got, even Purple Access with Judd and Chip. To expect this team, or to a degree, this franchise, to win 3 road playoff games with this quarterback and a roster, albeit pretty good, still flawed with holes, I just don't understand the vitriol and the hate. Yes, getting your butt kicked, that's annoying. Kevin O'Connell being 0-2 in the playoffs, sure, a little annoying, but he's going to get many other chances. Overall, Daniel, good season. I'm happy. The Vikings are going to come up with more draft picks. They're going to do everything they can to make this team as good as possible and J.J. McCarthy ready for next year. But I'm not angry, Daniel. If anything, when you take a step back, it's probably better that they flamed out at the end of the year, aside from maybe now not being able to franchise Sam Darnold and maybe get what they wanted for him in an open trade market. But long story, long-winded Ross rant. I don't get it, and I'm okay with it. I mean, I really am. I'm fine. I'm okay. Let's move on to the offseason. Let's get to free agency. Let's get to the draft. Let's fortify this roster. So who knows, maybe 2-3 years from now, we're talking about a J.J. McCarthy-led team that's appearing in the Super Bowl or legit Super Bowl contenders. But this team was not. They just weren't. Even at 14-3, they were not going to be a legit contender once they lost home field advantage. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, coming into this season, I never imagined that the Vikings would win 14 football games. I didn't see it. But you look at, the way people who look at strength of schedule before the season and try to predict, what the teams are going to look like that the Vikings are playing. I think it's kind of a flawed exercise because there's just so much change, year to year. You don't know exactly, how each team will perform. So I think there were some gaps in that schedule where, like Houston wasn't as good as people thought they'd be. San Francisco wasn't as good as they thought they'd be. The New York Jets struggled this year. Like, there were a lot of games on that schedule before the season that people thought were going to be much more difficult games than they really were. And you look at, the NFC North, for example. I mean, the Packers went 1-5 in the division and made the playoffs. So I think it was kind of a weird season all the way across the board. Like, the bottom half of the NFL was just really, really bad this year. Like, there was a huge cutoff line. There weren't a lot of teams clustered in that middle of the pack. You're either the top or you're at the bottom, and then there's a couple teams in the middle. It was a weird season in the NFL, in my opinion.
So the Vikings, Daniel, they're going to need help in the secondary. They basically have no returning players other than, I think, McGlothern, who's under contract and was drafted. You'd like to think, I thought Brian Murphy was just fine, or Byron Murphy. They'll probably maybe work out a deal with him just to have somebody back for consistency. I wouldn't expect Fabian Moreau, Shaq Griffin, or Gilmore back. Maybe one of the three just for depth to make it a lot easier to build your secondary. Who knows about Harrison Smith? Talked about this on Purple Dailies Before I Die. Miles Gorham brought this up. Probably need to work a little bit on the interior of the defensive line. But I would say, as important as that stuff is, and you need to do that, Daniel, anytime you sign a player, trade for a player, or draft a player, I think the Minnesota Vikings' first thought should be, how does this help make J.J. McCarthy better next year? And how does this move help accelerate his learning process? Because I think we'll all agree, Daniel, the Vikings probably aren't going to win 14 games next year. In theory, although, like you said, I really agree with it. The schedule in theory is going to be tougher. You're going to have a quarterback more than likely playing every game that hasn't played at the NFL level, aside from some practice time and a one preseason game before he got injured. I don't think the expectation should be to compete and win a Super Bowl next year. But next year, the expectation should be, let's do whatever we can to get to the playoffs, but let's do whatever we can to build a team around J.J. McCarthy So in 2026, when we think our Super Bowl competition window opens, we're ready to go. So you have all this money in free agency. You don't have a ton of draft picks yet, but they're going to get some comp picks. Who knows what happens with Sam Darnold, whether that's a comp pick or maybe you end up still franchising him and trading him, Daniel. But I just think every decision this offseason has to be about how does this help J.J. McCarthy?
I look at a few things when I evaluate teams that can compete in the playoffs. And this is why I didn't think the Vikings would go very far in the playoffs. And I thought these things were exposed and they played football opponents that were better. You got to be really good in 2-minute execution. I thought the Vikings were up and down in that area. Red zone, got to be able to come away with maximum points. You saw that in the Detroit game. They were up and down in the red zone this year. Running the football, I think this is the biggest variable for the Vikings that they got to figure that out through maybe some scheme tweaks, becoming more physical along the offensive line to be able to, throw to score, run to win type of mentality that the Vikings need to establish. You got to be able to, when the season goes on, run the football and close the football game out. I just didn't feel like the Vikings had that element of physicality. Their run game didn't really build off of their passing attack super well. There are a lot of drop back passing. They've got to work on finding ways to marry up the run and the pass. And I think that starts through personnel acquisitions, maybe some scheme tweaks, just trying to figure out what they can do to run the football with more consistency. And then, I think a lot of variables come back to this offseason. You got to be able to draft better. I mean, the Vikings, they need to get some contributors in here that are young players that can, not only provide depth for your team, but become contributors. Go look. It's an exercise. Go look at the Rams roster, especially in the defensive side of the ball, how many young contributors they have, the Eagles, the Lions. Washington had a really good 24 draft and then filled in with some nice free agent signs. I know, the strategy is they don't have a lot of picks this year. They kind of planned that way with the idea that they'd have a lot more cap space available, at like $70 million in cap. But you do, it's kind of misleading in the sense that like you have a lot of people coming off the books on your roster too. So it does give you the opportunity to retool and make some signings. And Kwesi did a good job bringing in, Van Ginkel and Grenard, getting those guys in here to help with the pass rush. But I think now the challenge is going to be, can you eventually get to the point where you're able to draft with more consistency? Because I think, free agency, you can bring in players to contribute, but there's only so much you can do with that. You still have to be able to draft effectively. So I think those variables, you got your quarterback that you want to invest your time and energy in. I think they'll, play JJ, sign Daniel Jones to a deal, get him in here, continue to, develop him. That's the perk of bringing him in later in the season. He was able to learn a little bit. He's got an off season. I think that's probably the plan. And maybe they do a tag and trade, but, is Darnold going to have that robust of a market now after seeing, the performances at the end of the year? And it's not all his fault. Offensive line, I thought, really struggled, especially, we talk a lot about the interior line, but the tackles struggled. Cam Robinson had a really bad game. That kind of caught up with them, the Darisaw injury. I thought defensively, you need defensive back talent. You need another defensive tackle. Harrison Smith's probably gone, so you probably got to bring in a versatile safety. There are a lot of things that they're going to have to figure out this offseason, and those are just a few that I've kind of earmarked in my mind.
Yeah, and I think where you and I agree a lot is on that offensive line and that interior offensive line. I'll bring this up again. When healthy, I think your tackles are pretty darn good. You can win with them. The problem is over the last couple of years, they're not always healthy. Christian Darisaw has yet to play a full season without an injury. Now, has he missed a ton of time prior to this year? No, but the fact is, a couple times a year, you're still having to plug and play. And I don't hold that against him, but it makes it a lot tougher to be at your best and have that cohesion when he's not in the lineup. The interior of the lineup, when you talk about the two guards in the center, I think two of those three need to be upgraded. Can you get by without upgrading all three? You probably can, but you need to upgrade at two of the three because I think philosophically the Vikings don't love to run the football. And then when they know they can't, it makes them not run the football even more. So I think that is a great place to start. And for me, probably priority number one, because if Brian Flores is back, and that's an if, I actually think the odds are higher than most people that he'll get another job. I'd put it somewhere at 30 to 40%. But if he's back, I trust him enough that whoever they identify and get in free agency and the draft can help. I don't have that same belief in the offense and identifying those guys. So I hope that when they do, it works, because I do believe that they will upgrade at 2 of those 3 spots, if not all 3. That's most important to me, Daniel, because to your point, scheme and philosophical, you have to run the ball more, but then when you do, you also have to be effective at it. I actually thought Aaron Jones, for the amount of times he ran into a line and got stuffed, when you go back and look at the numbers, and he missed some time, Daniel, he had a really nice year. And he might be back next year, too, on some sort of, 1 or 2 year deal. But I think it starts on the offensive line. And to your point, especially with a young quarterback, I'll air quotes call him a rookie when it comes to playing time. You just got to do stuff that can help him out. And asking him to pass 30, 40 times a game will not help him out. You're going to have to run the ball.
Yep, and the running back class is good. I think you can, continue to build skill set diversity in that room. I think that's the challenge. I think that's one of the blind spots the Vikings have had, is blending skill sets at different position groups. I think the wide receiver room the last couple of games was a storyline that I had. I haven't heard a lot of people even talking about that much. I didn't think the wide receivers were able to get enough separation. You saw exactly how they kind of took stuff away, playing a little more press man. They got safety robbing down on Jefferson, and they're just like, get open. Their physicality was a big reason why the Vikings weren't able to get separation. And you got, the pocket collapsing, Darnold holding the ball at times. I just think they need another physical dimension receiver. You look at that wide out room for the Vikings, all of those guys are smaller skill sets. They need a height, weight, speed type of wide out that can align in different spots and stretch the defense out a little bit. And that, I think that would open up some stuff offensively for them. So that's one of the weaknesses that I thought they had that didn't get enough discussion throughout the year. I kind of saw it early before the season, and then really it started to pan out as teams started to come up with this scheme to take away what the Vikings are doing offensively.
Very quickly, before we move on to another topic, we got 8 teams left. I think half of them are probably legit Super Bowl contenders. Maybe the other half can find a way to win another game, and maybe that changes my opinion. But do you have right now, of the 8 teams that are left, do you have 1 or 2 teams that you're reasonably sure will party with the Lombardi here in about a month?
I think it's going to be Kansas City and Detroit. I just think that Kansas City's defense, they're going to get some players back. Jalen Watson sounds like he's coming back in their secondary, which is huge. I think you look at what they were able to even do when Chris Jones was unavailable. Their defense still looked good. I felt like their offense was starting to catch stride. They saved some stuff for later in the season, and they hit stride. I think in the NFC, it's probably Detroit. They're able to run the ball with physicality. Then the play action game off of that, they're so creative offensively. I do have concerns about their defense, ability to hold up, especially with all the injuries they have. But the only team I think that could potentially contend with them is Philly, because, that Philly Rams matchup's interesting to me. I think Philly might be able to run the ball on them. The Vikings weren't really able to do that with frequent consistency. So I think Rams are playing really good ball right now. They are the hottest team. Their defense is peaking. They're the team that I think could potentially maybe surprise. I wouldn't be surprised if they beat the Eagles. It wouldn't shock me.
So I think very quickly, I think when you talk about the Lions in the Super Bowl, I actually think of the 4 teams that are left on the AFC, I think the one the Lions would fare the best against would be Kansas City. I think Baltimore, well, I guess, and Houston too, but I think Baltimore and Buffalo would give Detroit a lot more issues than Kansas City. Okay, very quickly, I know I said we'd move on, but I got to be honest. I think I'm the only Vikings fan in America that actually thinks Matt Stafford threw that ball away. I think that is a clear throwaway. Now, what I do think should happen on some of these plays, I think we have to have a serious conversation about what intentional grounding is and what it isn't. And knowing the Minnesota Vikings every year in the playoffs, when the Vikings tend to get screwed by something, they rectify it in the offseason for next year. I think that's a throwaway by Matt Stafford. That's not a fumble. But to me, you're really taking liberties on grounding when you know he's not attempting to throw it to Puka Nacua there. He's just trying to get rid of the ball. And the week before you had Jared Goff, which I absolutely think was intentional grounding. I thought he was close to being out of the pocket. But again, the intent there is he's not trying to even get that ball near anybody. He's just trying to get rid of it. And I know it's tough to legislate intent, but I guess I want your opinion. Did Stafford throw the ball away? Because I 100% believe that was a throwaway. That was not a fumble. You can see he's pushing his arm forward to get rid of the ball. But to me, that should be grounding. He probably didn't even know that Nacua was there. So to me, that's the issue. And the issue to me that's greater is we can go back and replay. And I've always told you this. We can go back and replay and say, okay, that's not a fumble. But we can't throw a penalty on something that we know is obviously a penalty because replay doesn't allow for that. So I've said this numerous times. If we're going to slow every game down with replay, then we're going to replay everything and not just pick and choose what we're replaying.
I think it speaks to it was an intent to get rid of the football to avoid the sack. But I don't know how that wasn't intentional grounding. It definitely is when you're throwing the ball with that kind of shovel pass type of motion where it's a short throw and you look at the receivers around, there was no way that ball was getting there. So I think, that was obviously intentional grounding. I still don't understand the ruling on it.
Early prediction before we move on, without knowing anything, just trusting to a degree the coaching staff and the front office. And I don't know how good J.J. McCarthy's going to be, but if he stays healthy, I think he's going to be good enough. I think your Vikings win 10 games next year and appear in the playoffs again. And I would be happy with that. Okay, let's move on to another topic here really briefly. I really don't know what it means anymore because we had so many opt-outs and players not playing in the big Duke's Mayo Bowl. Oh boy, about a week and a half ago. But the Gophers win again. I do think when you play a game, you absolutely want to win it. I don't think the losses in a lot of these bowl games matter nearly as much as they used to. But for the guys that played, pretty cool deal to win a bowl game, especially Max Brosmer, who comes here, gives the Gophers a year of his time and a year of his life. Kind of fun to see Elijah Spencer in his final game go home in the Charlotte area where he's from, played at the University of Charlotte, play well. This Gopher football team, Daniel, we've talked about it. They're going to lose a lot. PJ's talked about that they would be active in the transfer portal. They have been. I know they like their class coming in, but every coach says that. I guess the comment here is twofold. Bowl games, always nice to win them. Don't think there should be any bowl that the Gophers played or that they like the Gophers played in post New Year's Day. People say, oh, the attendance was bad. Well, the attendance was bad because both schools knew, especially Virginia Tech, half of our team's not playing. The weather looks terrible and it's post Jan 1. So those games should never be played after January 1st. I think that did a disservice to both programs. Good to win the game, but I'm intrigued to see where we go next year.
I have a solution for this. This is like a house maintenance item. I've been thinking about this for a long time.
Hang on.
House maintenance.
I think we should start the college football season earlier. I think we should start it like in August at some point, earlier in August. And I say that because you got this thing where like players are getting ready for the next semester and the CFP, and they got to make a decision. Like Bo Prubella had to decide that, well, I'm going to transfer because I need to be ready for the next academic year at my new school. Like, we need to get that out of the picture. And along with that, the transfer portal schedule might align better with the idea that, like, the bowl season quality could be better. You could get some guys maybe to potentially play. I am a supporter of starting the season earlier in August and getting it done quicker, because seriously, the national championship game being on January 20th, like, this is a long season. I mean, As someone who covers the sport, like, I'm absolutely exhausted right now. Like, you start in July, you go all the way to the end of January with, the team's games, the camp, the transfer portal, all that stuff. I mean, it is a lot. I can't imagine these coaches. So I think that is my solution for it. I thought the Gophers bowl game Brosmer being able to finish on that note, I think he was the X factor this year. Honestly, I think he was worth probably 3 wins for this team, and maybe even more, just because of what he was able to do mentally, able to execute the system and run it at the highest level. I think he's got a bright future, whether that's, as a backup in the NFL, providing value in a quarterback room, or in the coaching aspect of it down the road. I just thought that, they were able to get a lot of guys in there and play. Both teams, had absences, but that I always view the bowl game as like a springboard into the next season. I kind of count it as the first game of 2025, because it really is an opportunity for younger players to play and get a taste of it.
I think this year, this draft, Daniel, for Gophers fans, is going to be very fun, because in all likelihood, Ariante Ursary, wow, I really butchered that. He's more than likely going to go in the first round. Daniel Jackson's going to be drafted. Justin Wally's going to be drafted. John Joyner's probably going to be drafted. To your point, some people believe Max Brosmer could be a day 3 pick. If not, he's a free agent. I know I'm missing players, but there's going to be a fair amount of Gophers drafted in this draft, which to me is exciting. But then it's kind of twofold. You go, wow, they just had 5 players drafted, and you only went 7-5 and went to the Mayo Bowl. So I know you probably need to separate them a little bit, but I'm looking forward to the draft, especially with, right now on what I'm seeing, Daniel, and maybe you have more, maybe you have a different thought. Almost every mock draft has Ursary going in the first round, and I think that would be really cool if that comes to fruition.
There's a good chance, the pre-draft process will be a big part of it, nailing that, going to the Senior Bowl, executing down there well. Definitely has a strong body of work. That performance against Abdul Carter is something that I think a lot of teams are going to watch when they're studying Ursary. This draft class, there's a lot of productivity the Gophers have to replace. You're saying it. Ursary, Daniel Jackson, man, like, his season this year, I don't think it's appreciated enough, like how much that offense was able to kind of run through him, moving him around, access opportunities in motion, how defenses had to account for Daniel. Like, he made a huge stride forward. So Daniel, and then Elijah Spencer, and then you're going on defense, you got you got Strigow, who's a really reliable player that I think could be selected, Wally, Ethan Robinson, Cody Lindenberg. There are a lot of productive players that have to be replaced on both sides of the ball.
So I'm going to point out something that I just found comical, and maybe it was just the timing. Dragan Kesic kicks in the Hula Bowl, then 2 days later announces he's declaring for the NFL draft. I just saw that and giggled. I'm like, well, yeah, of course you are. Like, what you just participated in a postseason All-Star game where they're scouts. We know that, Dragan. This is not to throw stones at him. Very few kickers get drafted. I'm sure he'll get a look. I'm sure he'll get signed after the draft. He's not getting drafted, is he?
Yeah, kickers, that's just not. I don't see that happening. But undrafted rookie opportunity for sure. There's a chance that he could latch on with the team for sure.
Let's do this. We're gonna do the whoosh. So we're going to change topics, and then I'm going to hit you with one final thing on the way out the door. It's another house maintenance.
House maintenance.
Our favorite college basketball team is an absolute mess. I think you and I were a little bit worried about this going into the year. I don't care what anybody says. I know the buyout is upwards of $3 million. This team is going to struggle to win Big Ten games. They're already 0-5, maybe 0-6. Are they 0-6 already? I think they might be 0-6. That's how bad it is. I've already lost track. They're under 500 on the season. There's literally only a handful of games, Daniel, maybe a couple that you look at and say, yeah, they can win that game. And then will they surprise and maybe win a game? Sure. That's what happens in college basketball. 90+% that Ben Johnson is out. And I do feel bad. I wanted this to work. I just think there's all the evidence in the world for a variety of reasons, not all Ben Johnson's fault that it's not going to work out. I say this time and time again. I don't think the U treats athletics as serious as they should. I think they should treat it a lot more serious, as evidenced by coordinators coming to the University of Minnesota for a year or two and bailing for the same jobs at other places. I think that needs to be addressed. I think there's a lot happening with the landscape of college basketball that's not his fault. However, that doesn't mean that you can't spin the wheel of coaches and bring somebody else in to have the opportunity to, in all honesty, have as poor of results as Ben Johnson has had in 4 years. So my question to you, Daniel, trying not to blame it all on Ben Johnson, your house maintenance.
House maintenance.
Good luck with this one. Fix the Gopher basketball program. Not the women, because that's been rectified. Plitzy's team is good, and I think they're going to be somewhere between a 3 and a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. So good for Don Plitzowite and the Gophers, who are only 2 losses on the year, and their best player is not playing. Fix Gopher men's basketball, Daniel House. Good luck.
Well, I think you made a point there with Don, what Don's done with the women's team. I mean, very good fundamentals, play a lot of people. I think that's the key in all sports in college now. You got to find ways to get your bench rotational players involved, because it creates investment. It gets your players better by playing. Incorporates, creates connection among the whole roster. And I think that's what Don's done a good job of. Roster building piece. I think that's the biggest thing that the Gophers are going to have to figure out is, like, what pieces do you need to win and which players are the best to target to give you the best opportunity. I just don't think this team, I think the biggest issue with this Gopher basketball team right now is just the roster, like that backcourt, having a dynamic guard. I know Elijah Hawkins left. And I mean, that's, you lose Hawkins, you lose Payne, you lose Christie. I mean, those are 3 blue chip players for your roster that you did not have this year. So you got to be able to find a dynamic ball handler. I think that's been kind of a blind spot with Ben through the first few years of the program. Is every year you need to have at least one dynamic point guard ball handler. And this year, I just don't think that they have that speed and that, that guy that can really command it and the offense can run through and then, kind of get everything all set. So, the first half of these games, Rosh, you look at, like, recently, they've been pretty competitive in the first half, but then they get to the point where they're just totally gassed. Like midway through the second half, the wheels kind of fall off. So to me, the biggest thing you got to figure out is NIL, roster building, how those two mesh together, and, like, building a team that gives you the best chance to compete night in and night out.
And I'll lob this shot one more time. I don't think this will happen. I think the next coach, because I do believe there will be a next coach, is very likely to be coaching a team this year or does have coaching experience. But let's say the coach is a little bit lighter on coaching experience. Let's make sure that your staff has somebody who has coached before. That's my lob shot that I'd love to fire about this current Gopher basketball administration. Daniel House, what is at gophersguru.com? What do people need to know about in closing?
Tons of transfer portal insight. Transfer portal tracker. You can go read about all the Gopher football transfers that came in, what they bring to the table, who's departing, who's went where. Everything's all kept track of in that spot. Articles on the site giving insight into the defensive coordinator position, what to expect there with Corey Heatherman going to Miami. Lots of stuff to talk about. Insight and articles getting posted weekly. So check it out. Keep an eye on the website each day.
Corey Heatherman will never get a job again in this town. I can promise you that. Daniel House, always a pleasure. We'll catch up. Maybe we do this in a month or so. We'll catch up. This is not goodbye, Daniel. This is a see you soon.
We'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon. Daniel House, gophersguru.com. The best $5 you'll spend a month if you like Gophers athletics. Don't forget at Daniel House. Are we at Daniel House MN on X? That's what it is.
Yeah, Daniel House MN on X. Yep.
Yeah, you threw that change up at me a while back. I am Ross Brendel at the Ross Brendel on the X machine. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple and Spotify, please like, comment, and review. Same if you're on YouTube. Please subscribe, like, comment, tell your family and friends all about Minnesota Sports Chat. I'm back again real soon.
Thanks for listening to Minnesota Sports Chat, presented by Beans Coffee Company. Use the promo code SPORTSCHAT. That's one word, Sports Chat, to save at checkout. Follow Ross on X at the Ross Brendel. Like and subscribe to Minnesota Sports Chat wherever you get your podcasts. Rate and review kindly.